The question that I would like to tackle today is, should you cohabitate before marriage? Is it a good idea? Let's unpack it. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, and thank you again for joining me for another video. Today I want to touch on a little bit of a controversial subject, or at least it's controversial every time I bring it up. And that is whether or not it's a good idea to cohabitate before deciding to get married. For those who follow me, and for those who know me, you may have heard me say things like, it's not a good idea to treat a boyfriend like a husband, and that includes living together before deciding to get married. Now, every time I say things like that, I always get a bunch of people in my comments trying to argue the point, to say, oh, but how can you know if you want to marry someone if you don't live together, and how do you test out the relationship, and how can you really know if you're compatible, and da 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 da. And I 100% understand where all those comments are coming from. So I thought today I would unpack some of the arguments for and against cohabitating before marriage to kind of give you, I suppose, an insight into why I think the way that I think, based on my own experience and based on the research that we have on the topic. But understand that some of this is generalizations, and obviously this isn't going to apply to everybody. Everybody's different, and what you're wanting from a relationship might be very different. So I would say that predominantly this advice would be for women who actually value marriage and who are seeking marriage as sort of an outcome from their relationships. If you are somebody who does not believe in marriage, doesn't value marriage, is not really fussed either way, then that's perfectly reasonable, and this advice then might not be for you. You might find it interesting, but ultimately, whether or not you cohabitate with a partner is sort of irrelevant. The first and most common argument that I see bandied about cohabitating before marriage is this idea that it's a good way of testing out the relationship. People will say, how can you know if you're compatible if you don't live together first? How can you really get to know someone? Okay, so let's unpack that idea, because I think that logically it makes a lot of sense if you're thinking about it from a very cold and rational perspective. But see, here's the thing. In practice, it isn't exactly that simple and that straightforward, because people do not go into relationships with a very cold and rational approach. So theoretically, what people are saying is that they imagine, anyway, a couple living together and somehow having this sort of assessment of their compatibility and of their relationship to then determine whether or not marriage would be an appropriate next step. And if that is how people were approaching cohabitation, then I would agree. That is a perfectly good and rational thing to do. The problem is that most people are not approaching their relationships with such a cold, logical approach, if you know what I mean. People go into it with all kinds of feelings, and this is actually what happens in reality. So in reality, people will meet, they'll fall in love, and then they decide to live together for various reasons. It could be because they anticipate getting married, but a lot of the times they just slide into this situation where they end up living together because it's practical, it makes sense, they're spending all of their time together anyway, they're in love, they love spending time together, all of those things. And see, here's the problem. Once you start living together, their lives end up becoming enmeshed. And then they end up emotionally invested in this relationship. So the reality is that if or when they do notice red flags, they do see issues of compatibility, they're not actually quick to leave. It's not easy to leave once you're already living together. And this is actually supported in the research as well. And I'll get into that in a minute. But just understand that this argument, while it makes logical sense, doesn't actually pan out that way in reality, because once people are living together, inertia sets in. And so they will simply accept, or actually be more likely to accept, things in the relationship that they might not have otherwise accepted if they weren't living together, because it's actually difficult then to break up. And this becomes specifically and more prominently true with women who are looking to get married. Let's be honest. If a woman is very serious about wanting to get married, she's been dating this guy, they fall in love, and she's thinking like he could be the one. And he or she or they, however it comes up, suggests living together. She is now thinking they are taking the next step towards marriage. And her mind is going, finally I can give up on dating. Finally it's my turn. Finally I get my moment. I found my Prince Charming. I found the one. I'm going to live my dreams. I'm going to settle down and start a family. Okay. Let me tell you, that woman is not assessing the relationship from a cold, logical perspective while she's cohabitating with him. The red flags could be waving in her face. They could be smacking her in the face. But she is like white knuckling it, because there is no way that she is breaking things off with this man and going back to her single life, because already she's invested in the idea that they will get married. Just want you to understand that this whole argument of it's a good way of testing out the relationship presupposes that people are capable of making rational, logical decisions in circumstances where they are emotionally invested in a relationship and have intertwined their lives with another person. And to that, I say my experience suggests otherwise. It suggests that people are not making a good, cold, hard, logical assessment of this relationship and of their compatibility during their cohabitation phase. And if anything, cohabitating makes it more likely that they will simply accept behavior that they would not otherwise accept if they were dating and not living together. And my observations are actually supported by the research, which suggests, on the other side of the argument, that couples who live together before they've made a commitment to get married, and it's important to make that distinction, okay? That means living together before they've agreed mutually that they will be getting married. Usually that means living together before an engagement. So couples who live together before committing to getting married not only have higher divorce rates, because that could potentially be explained by other factors, but they also report lower levels of marriage satisfaction, lower levels of happiness in their relationship, and lower levels of feelings of commitment. And I'm going to refer to this study called Pre-Engagement Cohabitation Effect. And why I like this study is because it's one of those studies that looks at all the other studies and then draws various conclusions. So I will link it below and I'll try to bring it up here. I just want to read a couple of excerpts from this study. Those who cohabited before engagement reported lower marital satisfaction, dedication, and confidence, as well as more negative communication and greater proneness for divorce than those who cohabited only after engagement or not at all until marriage. And they say that the differences were generally small but could not be accounted for by length of marriage or variables associated with selection into cohabitation. And by that I mean the usual argument that, for example, people who cohabitate before marriage versus those who don't, you're going to see much higher rates of more conservative, more traditional, and more religious people in the latter group. But even taking that into consideration, they still found differences between the two groups. But I would highlight, more importantly, you do not see lower rates of divorce in groups that cohabitated before they got engaged. So if the argument that cohabitating is a good way of testing out a relationship and checking for compatibility, then what you would expect to see are lower rates of divorce. But we do not see that happening in reality, which means that the argument inherently is flawed, as I explained. And here they also refer to this inertia that I referred to earlier. They say, according to their inertia theory, cohabitation compared to dating without cohabitation increase the chances for marriage, partially because constraints to stay together increase when partners begin cohabitating. Thus, the experience of cohabitation may lead some couples to marry even though they would not have chosen to marry if they had not already been living together. And this is the point that I think is really important to highlight, because the idea that cohabitating is a good way of testing out the relationship to check compatibility is in direct conflict with the findings in this research, which suggest quite the opposite, that people will marry despite a lack of compatibility becoming present because they are already living together. And people would rather just take the path of least resistance than to actually make the difficult decision of untangling their lives and walking away from this relationship. Now, as I said, this pertains specifically to those who seek marriage. So one of the benefits of cohabitating might be that it is a valid and appropriate alternative to marriage for those who are not interested in marriage. Living together just for the sake of living together because that's what you want to do is absolutely fine, and there are lots of benefits, including reduced loneliness, shared expenses, more intimacy. So in some ways, it's kind of like a roommate with benefits. And look, that's fine if that's what you want. But I think the downsides really come to light when we are talking about it as a stepping stone towards marriage. So considering that cohabitating is not a great way of testing out compatibility, let's look at some of the other downsides. And this one is particularly for women. And I would say even more particularly for women who desire marriage and children. Okay, and here is a really, really big downside. If you as a woman want to get married and you move in with a man thinking that the next step is inevitably marriage, what often happens, and we see this a lot online now that women are, talking to each other, sharing their experiences, we see them waiting endlessly for a ring that will never come. And they waste years of their lives in this relationship thinking we're going to get married only for the man never to propose. And they beg and they plead and they make videos, embarrassing TikTok videos, trying to shame this man into proposing, but he won't. Or worse, eventually they twist his arm enough that he gives them what is now referred to as the shut up ring. And I've seen this happen a lot in practice, where I have these couples who are or were living together years and years and years, 6, 7, 8, sometimes even 10 years. They get married, and somehow within 2 years of their wedding, they're already separating. They're already coming to see me. And I think, what is it that happened that led this couple who've been living together for so long to then get married, and then almost instantly, before the ink has dried on that marriage certificate, they're getting divorced. And I think part of it is this phenomenon of the shut up ring. I think what usually has happened here is that the woman is wanting marriage, pressuring the guy, pressuring the guy, pressuring the guy. Eventually, he just gives in because his choice is either he marries her or they break up. So he marries her, but secretly, or maybe not so secretly, he resents her. He resents her for twisting his arm, for dragging him down the aisle, and he will find all kinds of passive-aggressive ways to punish her for that. And this inevitably leads them to then breaking up. Now, had this couple not lived together in the first place, it would have been much easier for the woman to simply walk away from the relationship when she realized that this man was not serious about taking the next step. It also forces the issue. So if you are living separately from a man and you are dating, he has to eventually make up his mind that he wants to marry you or leave. He will not get stuck in a situation where he is dating you endlessly, because keep in mind that the dating phase of the relationship is actually where the man has to put in the most effort. Once you're living together, he usually doesn't have to put in as much effort, which is one of the benefits for him. Let's be honest. And that's not a criticism, it's just the way that it is. So by dragging out the dating phase longer, you as a woman can assess how serious a man is to committing to you, because he is not going to date you for 6, 8, 12 months and have to continually put in consistent effort if he isn't really invested in the relationship, if he doesn't actually want to build a future with you, eventually his efforts will peter out, and that's absolutely fine, no problem, okay? But at least you're getting a very quick turnaround and you're not wasting years of your life. And this is the downside and the reason I often caution women against cohabitating with a boyfriend if their ultimate goal is marriage. Because while it can work out great sometimes, I know couples who lived together and then they got married and they are living happily ever after. The truth is, those couples would have been happy regardless. They were just really compatible, really happy together, and both equally committed to building a life together. So the cohabitating before marriage is an irrelevant issue. It wasn't the thing that made them a great couple. It was just something that they chose to do. But on the flip side, the risks as a woman in particular, because you do not have time on your side. Time is precious. Time is not something you can get back. And we have biological realities. If we want to settle down and have children, like, that is a fact. Wasting years of your life with a man who is not ready to commit to you, does not want to commit to you, does not see you as a potential life partner, but is just kind of there because it's easier. You're living together, you know what I mean? Inertia. Yeah, you don't have that luxury of time. He can waste all the time he wants, and then when things fall apart, he can just marry someone else in 6 months. Like, how many times have we seen that happen? I have had hundreds of stories from women just like that. I was with him for 7 years. I finally left because he wouldn't propose, and now he's marrying the next girl after 12 months. This is why that happens. Inertia. So you're setting yourself up for a situation where you're potentially wasting a lot of time for this supposed benefit of testing out the relationship, when in reality, you're not actually testing out the relationship, are you? Because you're not quick to walk away when things aren't going the way that you would like. When you're seeing the red flags, when you're seeing the warning signs, when you're seeing compatibility issues come up, you're not walking away. Be honest. So all in all, when you look at it like that, I hope you can understand where I'm coming from when I say that it is ultimately a losing prospect for a woman who would like to get married to live with a boyfriend before he has shown that he is fully committed to marrying you by actually proposing, actually getting engaged. So that's all I have for you today on this topic, but I would love to hear from you guys what you think. Have I changed any of your minds? Do you still believe that cohabitating before getting married or before deciding to get married is a good way of testing out the relationship? And what could we do instead? And that's a really good question, and probably one that I will cover in another video. How to actually vet a relationship for marriage, how to actually date for marriage, how to vet potential partners, because a lot of my content is actually geared towards that. So stay tuned, and if that sounds like something that you would like, make sure you're subscribed and make sure that you are following along. Love you guys, and I hope you have a beautiful day wherever you are in this crazy world. Bye for now.